Welcome to another entry in the Hyrule Compendium. Today our topic comes from commenter Nick Connor.
Just Nick Connor?
Just a good old-fashioned Nick Connor.
All right, Nick Connor.
Nick wanted us to talk about what we think is the most effective mode of travel in Zelda games. Now, we did a video on mounts and horses and stuff like that, so we're gonna probably do less of that, and maybe let's talk about the warping.
Now, warping has been around since Legend of Zelda.
Since day one.
That was a not very effective form of warping. There were two different types. One, you had the whistle, and when you blew the whistle, it would take you to just outside of a particular dungeon. I think it was random. I think there might be, like, if you were at a specific location facing up, then you would go to a specific one. But it was like, unless you did research, I think it was random. There was also the, like, once you got the power bracelet, you were able to push certain blocks, and you would go to this, like, underground staircase, and you can go to 3 different locations. But it was also random, because you didn't know which one took you where. But I think there were only, like, 4 locations you could go to. Also kind of cryptic and not very effective. A Link to the Past introduced the flute with the different warp points.
Yeah, and that was much more effective because you at least knew where you were going. Sometimes if you had to get to somewhere, it's still a little bit of a pain.
That was a relatively small world to begin with, so even getting from one place to another didn't take more than 2-3 minutes, regardless of where you were in the overworld.
Link's Awakening actually has one of the funniest warps, I think.
Well, there's a couple of them.
There's the ones where you just jump in and it takes you to the different ones. Then they also had, you get the Ocarina or flute and you learn a song.
The Mambo's Mamba?
And it takes you to one spot right outside of
Crazy Tracy's house.
Yeah.
It's a one-way warp
to one spot. I'd wonder what the backstory on, like, why that was the decision, but they're probably pretty limited with the Game Boy.
I'm sure they could have done the flute, just like they did in A Link to the Past. I feel Ocarina and Onward, it kind of took the A Link to the Past model a little bit. There's always different variants. Like with A Link to the Past, once you got the flute, all 8 locations were open. Ocarina and Onward, it was the locations you had to sort of like activate them. In the case of Ocarina, it was learning the various warp songs.
With A Link to the Past, by the time you get that warp, you've gone to a lot of these places. With Ocarina of Time, I think they're still trying to encourage you to explore new places and stuff.
Well, you also don't get the warps really until you're an adult. So it is a little further along in the game. Nothing's really totally out of the way in that game, I think. Majora's Mask did have, I think, a lot more warp locations. I think they added a few of them in the 3D version of the game, too. Or did they just move some of the owl statues?
I think they just give you the Song of Soaring earlier. You get it at the Southern Swamp instead of right before entering Woodfall.
So Oracle of Ages and Seasons, you get the Gale Seeds. You just use a Gale Seed and you can warp to any of the mystical seed tree locations once you've actually gotten the trees. It's very much like Majora's Mask, I'd say, where you first have to get the main item, which is the Gale Seed, and then you have to unlock the various locations.
Okay.
Not the most efficient manner, but there's not actually that many warps. I think there's like 5 in both worlds in Ages and like 10 of them total in Seasons.
That's kind of like with what you're saying in A Link to the Past, though. It's like a smaller world, so you're not spending too much time getting to places. In Wind Waker, it kind of had the same thing, where you just get set locations.
Yeah.
They're kind of random.
Not very efficient.
No. Twilight Princess, you got Midna.
Yeah.
To help you out.
And you can warp to wherever you killed the shadow beasts.
And it's pretty good coverage.
There was always one that always annoyed me. When you first cross the Bridge of Eldin, and they take the bridge out. You know, there's those shadow beasts that appear right there. But you are regular Link at this point. You are not in wolf form. So you have to use spin attacks. And I remember, like, not knowing you could beat the shadow, those guys without, like, I thought you needed to be Wolf Link at first. So I didn't get that warp location. And then much later in the game, I went to the desert, and you find the Bridge of Eldin, but you can't warp it there because you don't have that location.
If you don't do that, it's kind of a pain.
Yes,
and the hidden village part.
Yeah, then you got to go to the hidden village, and how do you get to the hidden village without that warp point? You got to go to Castletown, and
right, that's so annoying.
Yes, very much annoying. Now, the benefits were there were a lot of warp locations if you actually activated all of them.
And it was like Ocarina of Time, to where you couldn't really start using that system till you had explored a little bit of the world.
I think you could when you were in wolf form, but when you were in human form, you weren't able to.
Yeah,
it's when you got the Master Sword, you were able to just warp between human and wolf at any point, which allowed you to then use the warping mechanism. That's what it was. Phantom Hourglass, you had to get the Cyclone Slate. It's an optional item. You have to go to an optional island, solve a puzzle, you meet a few characters, you get this optional item, and then there's these random golden frogs just in the ocean, and you have to shoot them, and they hold up a sign, which then activates that location. You pull up the slate, you draw the symbol, and you warp there. It's fun. You never need to do it. It's, I think, one of the few games where warping is completely optional. Now, Spirit Tracks was terrible, because the warps, you had to activate them, and they were only from one point in the map to another point in the map. So it was not, oh, I need to go to that specific area, or how do I get there? Oh, there's a warp there, but that warp is all the way in the other quadrant. Very, I don't know what they were thinking with that one.
Okay, Skyward Sword.
Did Skyward Sword have warping?
I don't think so. You really just kind of, you can go to the sky world and fly around, and then when you go back down to a place, you choose where you go to.
And they did a good job of having plenty of those, I think, the goddess statues all over. Like, if you drop down to Faron Woods, you can go to where you fought the imprisoned. You can go to the beginning of Faron Woods, like the Deep Woods. I think there's multiple locations within Faron Woods.
And in turn, in those places, you can return to the sky, too. So, yeah, I would say
it was not a big hassle to get to the sky whenever you needed to.
Well, A Link Between Worlds had similar one to A Link to the Past, almost identical.
Yeah, the broom. There was also the cracks to get from the light world to Hyrule. So that brings us to Breath of the Wild, which had by far the most warp areas, because you can warp to all of the shrines, the divine beasts, and the towers. Even so, there are still some times where you have to get to a certain point in the map, and you've already been in that region, but you're like, what's the close? Oh, it's this shrine, and that's still a ways away. That goes to show that the world is just so big.
Yeah, I think for the most part the coverage is pretty good. Like, even if there's not a shrine, a lot of times you can warp to a tower and parasail halfway to where you're going. But if you have to sometimes get up a mountain or something, it's, that's a little annoying.
Yeah, sometimes though, there are locations that are kind of off in the distance, if you're getting like a Korok seed, that even if you know exactly where you're going, it might take 4 or 5 minutes to get there.
Yeah.
My biggest gripe, I don't even know if this is a game problem, but it's the loading. It takes 30 seconds to warp. Literally 30 seconds. I think I counted it before.
And that's, I think about that all the time when that happens. Like, oh, maybe I should do something while this.
It's a bathroom break almost, like between loading.
Oh, I do that, yeah.
Yeah. So that's the only problem, actually, I think. It's a very efficient system. I like you can only warp to locations you've already been. It's one of the best ones, actually. So which is the most efficient?
I will probably say Breath of the Wild is the most efficient. I'd say the loading times definitely suck, but to getting to exactly where I need to go, Breath of the Wild, I think, has the coverage pretty good. It's not the most fun. Like we've talked in the other games, a lot of the games have some sort of thematic element, like you have to play a song, or you're talking about shooting the golden frogs and stuff like that. They give you an item that makes it so you can have a video game interface. You're just, selecting a spot on the map and warping,
So I would say A Link to the Past / A Link Between Worlds, but the only reason I'll say Breath of the Wild instead is because the timing of the game. You are able to warp in Breath of the Wild almost immediately once you activate the Great Plateau Tower, because you can just warp back to it, and they actually tell you that right away. Whereas A Link to the Past, it's halfway through the game before you get the ocarina, or the flute, I should say.
And you can warp in almost any situation in Breath of the Wild.
Yes, mid-fall, mid-climb.
Yeah. Let us know some of your favorites. Maybe there's a, maybe there's a one that is an underdog in this. That
Yeah, Triforce Heroes, where it's a hub and you just click where you go.
Or Four Swords Adventures.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great warping.
Leave us some other topics you'd like us to discuss. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. You can see some of our other compendiums. And thanks for watching.